My name is Franco Cortez, Director of Aging Analytics Agency, the longevity-focused analytical subsidiary of Deep Knowledge Group, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator for today's talks and discussions. We are joined today by a number of thought leaders, executives, and professionals in the healthcare, biotech, and pharma investment space who have come together to discuss major trends, opportunities, challenges, and forecasts at the intersection of pharma, biotech, and longevity investments, financing, public markets, and more. Our host for day 3 is Deep Pharma Intelligence, a specialized analytical agency producing regular analytical reports on major areas of high potential in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries, maintaining ratings of companies based on their innovation potential and business activity in the biotech space, and providing strategic consulting services to various top-tier clients, including major investment funds and banks, family offices, insurance companies, government organizations, and large pharma companies, among others. The company is a joint venture between two highly specialized UK-based market intelligence hubs in the pharma and biotech space, those being Deep Knowledge Analytics and Biopharma Trend. This 3-day conference also serves as a fairly convenient frame for announcing the official launch of 2 new open access special analytical case studies produced by Deep Pharma Intelligence, those being Landscape of Advanced Technology Companies in the Pharmaceutical Industry and AI for Drug Discovery, Biomarker Development, and Advanced R&D Landscape Overview, both of which are up to date as of Q4 2021 and available freely for your viewing pleasure at deep-pharma.tech. These reports, like all offerings from Deep Pharma Intelligence, have been designed to provide key insights to industry stakeholders and to equip them with deep expertise on how their strategic agendas can be optimized in order to leverage novel research, new technologies, and emerging market opportunities, as well as how they can stay competitive in a rapidly changing technological environment, taking into account shifting global priorities and trends. These reports are also complemented by Deep Pharma Intelligence's big data analytics platform and dashboard, where registered users can create their own interactive analytical reports in their spheres of activity and interest, including such functionalities as company SWOT analysis, funding distribution analysis, regional statistics, and more. So today we'll be hearing from a number of biotech, pharma, healthcare, and longevity investment executives, professionals, and experts, each of whom will share with us their latest insights, findings, and forecasts, followed by a roundtable and panel discussion, which will bring everyone together to explore the various topics covered in today's session in a deeper and more dynamic manner. To start us off for today, we'll be hearing from Dr. Andrei Pavillo, Director of Deep Pharma Intelligence, who will be giving an overview of investment trends in pharmaceutical deep tech and the longevity industry. Dr. Pavillo will be followed by Helen Uvarenko, Head of Analytics for Deep Pharma Intelligence, who will be sharing some deeper insights into their big data analytics platform. Helen will be followed by Ihor Kendhov, Deputy Managing Partner of Deep Knowledge Group, on the investment analytics capabilities of both Deep Knowledge Analytics and Deep Pharma Intelligence. We will then hear from Mark Leakey, Senior Advisor and Independent Board Member of Global Markets Advisory Group, LLC, on SPAC considerations for sponsors and private companies. Followed by our very own Kate Batts, Director of Strategy and Business Development for Deep Knowledge Ventures, who will be sharing some insights at the intersection of pharma, longevity, and femtech. We'll then hear from Kevin Chen, CEO of EDOC Acquisition Corp, on how SPACs can help biotech companies grow. Followed by Daniel Haders II, a healthcare investor and operator, Sway Ventures, who will be delivering a talk titled "The Future of Pharma is AI." And last but not least, Swati Chaturvedi, co-founder and CEO of Propel X, on imagining the two eyes innovation and investment in life sciences. Once again, following the individual talks, we will bring everybody together for a panel discussion to explore the various topics covered during today's session in a deeper and more dynamic manner. And a reminder for our viewers, if you have specific questions for our speakers, please feel free to pop those into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll do our best to cover those during the roundtable. And a reminder, once again, that this is day 3 in session 4 of a 3-day conference. All of our attendees today will be receiving a follow-up email in the coming days containing the individual recordings of both today and previous sessions, including our morning session from today. So please watch out for that. And I highly encourage you to view the other sessions if you happen to have missed them. Without further ado, I would like to welcome to the floor our first speaker, Dr. Andre Bavailo, once again, Director of Deep Pharma Intelligence, who will be delivering some insights on investment trends in pharmaceutical deep tech and the longevity industry. Andre, a pleasure as always. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Franco, for the introduction. As Franco already introduced, Deep Pharma Intelligence is a joint venture between Deep Knowledge Analytics, part of Deep Knowledge Group, and Biopharma Trend, leading media resource in the life sciences and healthcare. Today, I'd like to briefly introduce the investment trends in the pharmaceutical, deep tech, and longevity industry, and provide some case studies about companies, how they're doing. So first of all, a couple of words about the Deep Knowledge Group. Deep Knowledge Group is the quite diversified set of organizations, including the financial arm of Deep Knowledge Group, which is Deep Knowledge Ventures Fund, Longevity Capital, Longevity Financial Advisors, AI and Pharma Actively Managed Certificate, and other organizations. The financial arm is backed by deep industry analytics by a number of analytical agencies serving the group. This includes Agent Analytics Agency, Deep Knowledge Analytics, Deep Pharma Intelligence, and many other subsidiaries. We also have a set of non-profit organizations doing active work in the area of deep tech and longevity. So starting my talk about the artificial intelligence in pharmaceutical research, first of all, I'd like to show you this slide kind of illustrating what happened just within several years with the ecosystem of AI-driven drug discovery and biotech companies. So you can see the industry, the ecosystem basically grew kind of significantly, and we have seen tremendous growth in the number of startups building some or applying or adopting some artificial intelligence systems for the pharmaceutical research. We have seen pretty much every big pharma company delving into the area of AI-driven drug discovery or somehow applying these technologies. We have seen the interest from the camp of contract research corporations, and also we have seen the rise of big tech companies such as Google, Tencent, Baidu, and others ushering into the healthcare with their technology offerings and actually trying to get the part of the market themselves. The artificial intelligence has been growing in the pharmaceutical industry over a long period of time, essentially. So the concept is old. It has emerged in the middle of the last century, but only like over the last decade or so, the technology gained major traction and major commercialization stage because of maturation of the artificial intelligence itself, but also because of the maturation and significant progress in the computational resources, the emergence of GPUs, emergence of many kinds of data, big data infrastructures, and the availability of big data itself. So the convergence of these kind of technological trends, it boosted and catalyzed the I would say exponential progress in the artificial intelligence space. And the pharma have seen the AlphaGo moment somewhere in 2018, 2019, where have started seeing first kind of major proof of concept cases where companies managed to accelerate drug discovery, specifically development of preclinical candidates using some kind of deep learning based software or advanced analytical systems. So from the point of view of general market and the perception of investors of this space, we have gone from the from the kind of skepticism around 2016, 2017, and all the way to transition to actually the acceptance and transition from quantity to quality, and then actually the market consolidation is can be seen in the nearest future. So we have gone from skepticism to exception and strategic prioritization just within several years. That's what's going on, and that's how the financial markets react. And this has been driven in the very early years by kind of hype around the area, as with many advanced technologies. But then the hype actually grew into the numbers actually grew into quality, and we have started seeing real breakthroughs. For example, the Silicon Medicine recently announced the discovery of the new panfibrotic target, novel target, and 2 preclinical candidates. Combined, this whole project took something around 2 years, 18 months for the first phase and 6 months for the kidney fibrosis candidates. And they did it at a fraction of cost of a typical drug discovery process. And so they used their platform, which is kind of the AI-driven platform, which combines preclinical research, de novo drug design and chemistry, generative chemistry, and even clinical predictions software. So the company was kind of well priced by the investor community. It just raised 255 million round C, and the combined funding raised by the company exceeds $300 million. Other cases are Benevolent AI and AI Therapeutics. Both companies managed to apply their AI platforms to kind of rapidly develop or drug candidates for very serious cases, in this case for COVID-19. And essentially, the Benevolent applied their knowledge graph to repurpose the existing drug very rapidly, and then they found that the prediction was actually correct, and the drug showed efficacy in clinical trials and was FDA authorized for COVID treatment. And then AI Therapeutics also has the clinical trial running. So both companies have raised significant funding. Earlier examples were Deep Genomics and Helix, who also developed end-to-end platforms driven by AI, artificial intelligence, and then they all kind of developed drug candidates, unique drug candidates very rapidly at a fraction of cost, and they all were kind of quite significantly praised by the investor community as well. So some of the companies of the AI drug discovery community even went as far as to go on public markets, so they effectively had a successful exit. For one very nice example is Recursion Pharmaceuticals, which actually brought extremely innovative approach of combining the robotization and artificial intelligence in biology. And they have gone on public markets in April this year with more than 500 million IPO. Another case is Exscientia, which also developed the AI-driven system and already clinically validated several candidates, and they had successful IPO just quite recently with more than 500 million as well. Lantern Pharma has developed an end-to-end solution, AI-driven solution for oncology drug discovery. They have a relatively moderate IPO, but still the company has tremendous potential. I have seen the presentation just yesterday on our day 2, and I strongly advise everybody to check the presentation. Impressive results. Schrödinger raised more than 200 million in IPO in 2020, and they have integrated platform for cheminformatics and pretty much all the computational tools needed for drug discovery. And finally, interesting cases, Valo Health, which has gone to IPO through the merger with Hosla Ventures acquisition company, a so-called SPAC, road to the public market, and they have a deal of almost 3 billion, and that's quite a trend these days to use the SPACs to access public markets in a more flexible way. And the Valo Health is a developer of the integrated kind of platform driven by AI, and it provides the whole coverage for the drug discovery workflow, from the very early ideas all the way to identification of and nomination of preclinical drug candidate. Here's just some other examples of publicly traded companies in this space. They all have gone on public markets recently, just within a couple of years. And what we have been observing in this space is the competition, where stronger players who emerged somewhere in 2015 or something like that, they kind of become even stronger with more funding, and all the validated cases, they kind of drive this growth, whereas weaker players who kind of used AI to advertise in early days, they are kind of dying out and losing the competition. So there are many companies. And the important takeaways from this observation that I just have gone through is, first, that you probably noticed that all these companies that are so successful in this space, they are all building kind of R&D platforms. So we are entering the era of R&D platform and platform-based drug discovery. This is a significant paradigm change in the pharmaceutical research, I believe. And we have seen the cases of substantial improvement in cost and time of drug discovery. And this is what Vijay Pandey called the industrialization of biology research in one of his blogs recently. So by industrialization, we mean that drug discovery as the research practice goes more from the craftsman stuff, where the innovation actually happens kind of randomly, to more or less systematized, high scale and higher predicted way compared to previous practices. So, and finally, this gives the ability to generalize these companies, these platforms, to broader scope of therapeutic areas. This is a nice competitive advantage to have when you are not bound to only one therapeutic area or one molecule, but you can apply the platform to quickly, adjust, repurpose, or pivot to other therapeutic areas. These all factors that drive the kind of growth in financial terms, because the companies of this pack are favored by private and public investors nowadays. The trends for venture capital, we can see a clear trend for the increase in venture capital, and also we see the increase in the amount of rounds, and many later stage rounds are happening. And actually, this brings us to the idea that probably next year we will see several major IPOs in this space. So we should watch for this, for those opportunities. An important driver showing the quality of these new companies entering the public markets but also the private companies. The important trend is the increase in industry traction. The industry traction is typically measured by the amount of collaboration with top brands like Big Pharma, where companies kind of demonstrate their expertise, and this expertise is accepted and gladly tried by these big corporations. So we have profiled a lot of such collaborations, and you can refer to our reports to check details, to check the kind of more in detail what is going on here. But last but not least, artificial intelligence is not the only trend here, and of course, this technology is a complex phenomenon, and it depends on many other technologies to thrive. For example, the advent of big data providers, of the very important trend on the lab automation and robotization to gather data in high throughput manner. This is the important part. And the rise of quantum computing. I mean, we have profiled a lot of companies from this technology stack, and they all contribute to the overall growth of the pharmaceutical industry, but also in change of accents in how investors invest and where they invest these days. You can check our big data analytics platform on the website. I would not talk about this too much because my colleague, our next presenter, will talk a little bit more about this. Also, you can check the publicly traded companies dashboard and also learn about these companies in more details. Okay, just a couple of words about longevity industry. Actually, I suggest to check the very insightful and detailed talk by our general partner, Dmitry Kaminsky. He delivered the talk earlier today, so please check this. He described this industry in detail, but I just very briefly go over this segment. So the global longevity ecosystem is much more complex than the AI and pharma ecosystem. It has more than 20,000 companies right now. But of course, the lion's share of these companies are not only in scientific sectors, but in many other related sectors, such as insurance, etc. The longevity industry is a very complex industry. It's quite early days, but it's extremely accelerating. And why it's understandable why, because the global population is aging really fast, and the problem of the cost of healthcare is rising. So the governments has to prioritize the their strategies, national strategies, and international regulatory frameworks to meet those challenges. So the experts in longevity industry, they are kind of working on this, and our group is very active in this area. So the overall longevity ecosystem is projected to grow up to 33 trillion in 2026, which is a nice opportunity to have. The United States is still the leader in this space, but I would say that on this graph, we have quite small contribution from Asian region, but in reality, this region is really accelerating rapidly in this area, and we can see a lot of public launches in Asian stock markets and also a lot of private activity. So just examples of several longevity-focused companies by the amount of their investments. A lot of money is flowing in this area. And finally, you can refer to this industry and kind of analytics, deep analytics on this at our website, Agent Analytics Agency, and one of my colleagues will explore this dashboard a little later. So I strongly advise you to refer and read the series of books by our general partner, Dmitry Kaminsky. He is the influencer and thought leader in this area of longevity industry. And This read is not only providing the kind of technical and scientific peculiarities of this industry, but also providing the strategic view and regulatory view of how we should manage and address this rising global problem. Really insightful read. I strongly recommend it. So also refer to our investment digest. This is a product of the Pharma Intelligence, and also a number of useful links to check our latest products and launches. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening and finalize my talk.
Thank you so much, Andrei. Wide-ranging and insightful as always. I would now like to welcome to the floor our next speaker for today, Helen Uvrenko, Head of Analytics for Deep Pharma Intelligence, who will be sharing some deeper insights into the overall scope of functionality and capabilities of Deep Pharma Intelligence's Big Data Analytics dashboard. Helen, a pleasure to have you with us as always. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Franco, for welcoming me. Give me a second, please. Okay, so hi everyone. Deep Pharma Intelligence is happy to see you all at our final session for this conference, and being the head of analytical department at Deep Pharma Intelligence, I would like to present our big data analytics platform. So as you may remember from the previous presentations of my colleagues from Deep Knowledge Group, Deep Pharma Intelligence is the joint venture between Deep Knowledge Analytics and company named Biopharma Trend, which results in the fact that DPI focuses on the number of key technological areas, including promising biotech startups, therapeutic products, AI for drug discovery and development, and different emerging therapeutic modalities like technologies and trends in precision medicine and other. So because of the pharmaceutical market expansion in technologies and companies' active growth, these areas are considered quite attractive for investments. So under such conditions, data about companies, their collaborations, mergers, acquisitions, fundings, venture investments is getting difficult to track down. This is why we created a platform with the sophisticated cloud-based engine for advanced market and business intelligence in the pharmaceutical, healthcare, and biotech industries, because we were fulfilling the request for easier data processing and automated analytics. Except that, platform includes data mining engine, infrastructure for expert data curation, and advanced visualization dashboards like mind maps and knowledge graphs. So given a general overview of the platform, it provides you with such basic entities as companies, investor companies, and of course, downloadable static DPI reports, which are also always available at our main website. A company as an entity has such default compounds as contact information, country, patents, IPO status, general activities in the area, SWOT analysis, and many other. Of course, similar compounds and parameters are available for investment companies. So speaking of the commercial value of the platform, these are many things like business and technical due diligence for companies, investments analytics, actionable insights about primary and secondary markets, data-driven insights about emergent areas in the medical research technology, including pharmaceutical, biotech, healthcare, etc., and identification of growth opportunities for companies, including partnerships, technology deals, venture investments, and other investments product. Well, another question is who can benefit from such a platform? This can be different institutions, starting from investments, investment funds, banks, into startup hubs, accelerators, private research institutes, contract research organizations, consulting companies, and other agencies. So first component of the platform to see is interactive analytical report, which contains information about companies presented in downloadable version. Interactive report has cross-links for informational sources for deeper research. For example, if company that you're looking for is presented on some kind of a chart, well, this chart is going to be also clickable for user convenience, and every section to display, you'll be able to see all the companies presented and see what parameters they have. Also, there you can find additional information like SWOT analysis of relevant technologies and companies, interview with the selected vendors, scope of AI application in pharma R&D, and many other. So another part of the platform where you can get, this is the interactive mind map section. There you can see entities presented in the form of a popular DKG design. Regarding the AI drug discovery report, such parameters as therapeutic and research focuses, fundings, business model, and more are available. Mind maps also show connections between investor companies and their multiple mentees. Every company and category on the mind map can be seen separately, and this is done for more thorough studies. Okay, another part of our platform is the part of competitors. So this will allow you to analyze companies, investors, competitors, and investors of competitors if you are deeply interested in some concrete companies, so you would like to know their position in the market. And that's why you definitely need to have a look on their state of fundings and other companies who will also like to keep an eye on them. This will give you a ground-up view on company's current state of affairs and see who can be they compared to and why. Another extension of the competitors analysis, this section was created to correlate SWOT parameters of several companies of interest to see what they're capable of, defining with the mathematical algorithms, such as characteristics as the market scene, team composition, financial position, products pipeline maturity, and many others are brought to measurable unified parameters. So this is an apt illustration of companies' differences, weak spot, and strong suits. So another part of the platform is Portfolio Constructor, which is a tool for competitive companies analysis again, which is based on their stocks and daily income, of course, accompanied by portfolio summary and net income. I'm happy to see you all today with us, and I will be glad to see you on our platform as a user too. Please. That's all for me for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. Very much appreciated. A reminder to any of our viewers who have specific questions for our various speakers today to pop those into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We'll do our best to address them during the roundtable and panel discussion a little bit later. I'd now like to welcome to the floor our next speaker, Ihor Kenyahov, Deputy Managing Partner of Deep Knowledge Group, who will be giving some insights into the investment analytics capabilities of both Deep Knowledge Analytics and Deep Pharma Intelligence. Ihor, always a pleasure to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Franca, and thanks for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be here, colleagues, and indeed I will be talking about investment analytics capabilities, both at Deep Knowledge Analytics and Deep Pharma Intelligence, with the main focus on algorithms and data for longevity investment analytics. And first and foremost, like general biotech, pharma, and longevity analytics. So firstly, a couple of words about what differentiates longevity investment analytics, biotech investment analytics from investment analytics in general. What should we pay attention to, and how are features and some specific peculiarities of biotech capital market influence and justify the tools that we apply here for investment analytics, for risk management, for portfolio optimization, and so on. Firstly, like, despite the fact that there are many promising biotech and longevity companies, there is also a lot of hype, which is unreliable and which is not based on any validated results, like medical results on humans. Secondly, sometimes there is lack of financial data, and some conventional methods of investment analytics, like analysis of future returns, analysis of real options, cannot be applied because companies act mostly as R&D facilities, as some research organizations. They have contracts, but these contracts are very long-lasting, and they are very disintegrated from other activities of the company. So we need to apply a lot of alternative data, or at least what is called in other industries as alternative data. It includes data on R&D, on biomarkers, academic results of the company, team composition, and so on. Also, and this is the most important in terms of stock market analytics, publicly traded markets, is that longevity stocks mostly look non-volatile and stable compared to many other types of stocks, especially to tech stocks, for example. But that's not true. I mean, they look like, but even especially if you look at their volatility, but it just demonstrates us that volatility is a wrong measure of risk for them. And we will need to develop a very different metrics for risk assessment to deal with longevity publicly traded companies, and also, by the way, with pharma companies. Considering this abundance of data, it is very crucial in order to succeed to replace manual analytics with artificial intelligence, with automated tools, at least on early stages of the due diligence process. Actually, like, maybe the main point that I want to highlight here in terms of features of longevity stock market and publicly traded companies analytics is that the returns of the longevity stocks are not normally distributed at all, and all tool set that is based on normal distribution, that is used in conventional financial analytics, it can be applied here in only very limited extent, and we need to deal with wild nature of stock prices in biotech. What I highlight here in red, so like the presence of very abnormal returns that are not common for the market in general, but which may be very common for longevity stock market, and that can change a lot. Okay, so about a little bit more about longevity stock market dynamics. So as just to provide you some overview, what's different and how can we analyze it? So actually, we compare here several major indices: S&P 500, that corresponds to the whole market; IBB, that is a general biotech index. And there are two indices that relate to longevity composite index, that basically combines 600 longevity corporations globally, and advanced longevity index developed specifically proprietary index by Deep Knowledge Group that tracks the most promising longevity publicly traded companies, and we see that if we are just selecting total longevity market, there is no overperformance. Yeah, it goes just like S&P 500, although it outperforms biotech market. But if we apply some less conventional analytics, and if we construct a portfolio based on alternative data and based on proprietary risk management tools, we can obtain really above market results, like more than 50% per year. Okay, so I will be talking now about specifically what kind of analytics do we have here, what tools applicable for investors are present there, but considering that my colleagues already explained a lot about our platforms, I will focus predominantly on investment analytics without going into details in other directions. So this is a better version of our dashboards, which you can access for free for now. And it provides a lot of analytics tools and features, including financial forecasting and portfolio optimization, and including advanced search on investors and companies, competitor analysis, interactive network diagrams, and many others. Actually, totally, we have now about 9 million data points in the dashboard, and we have data on more than 24,000 companies and 9,000 investors. All this data is represented by more than 1,000 parameters for each entity. And I will start from investment analytics for private market, for startups, for private equity. As my colleagues mentioned previously, we have a multi-parametric assessment analytics system that actually combines several hundreds of parameters into 10, 20 vectors that enable automated real-time analytics of SWOT analytics of longevity and biotech startups, showing their strengths, weaknesses, and areas for improvement. Each vector on this diagram is actually an equation of several dozens of parameters that are calibrated based on the data on the startups and companies that we consider to be successful. And also we can compare several companies in the same chart to see what are the relative strengths and weaknesses of each company. On the other hand, quite powerful and useful tool is what we call smart competitor matching, that allows to see companies that are similar to some selected company. It is basically calculation of the distance between companies in terms of the parameters that we analyze. Like returning to the previous slide, so every company has specific values for each of these parameters, and we just can find companies that have similar similar set of parameters to some specific company, and we believe that it may be an approximation of similarity of these companies. It may be applied by investors who want to see similar companies. It might be applied by companies to see their closest competitors, and it may be applied by corporations that want to get into R&D agreement with some AI pharma startup, for example. On the other hand, we have interactive network diagrams that enable investors or competitors to evaluate the prospects of the company by looking at its place in the industry, including collaborations, partnerships, the scientific cooperation, connections of R&D team, and also level of similarity of the market. All these results are represented in the form of graphs that actually connects the whole longevity industry into one single database and provides actual network of connections, of collaborations, and links in the whole industry. Regarding the set of technologies we apply here, it's a mixture of basic data analytics and math technologies and more or less advanced AI, machine learning tools, including deep neural networks, especially recurrent neural networks, and neural networks with LSTM layers. In terms of forecasting and analytics for publicly traded market, we also apply extensively stochastic processes, including Brownian motion and non-Gaussian models, and unsupervised machine learning and reinforcement learning is applied for clusterization of companies and the competitor analysis. What I mentioned earlier, it's defining the closest competitors and defining similar companies. At the same time, on the level of private equity analytics, on the level of startup analytics, it's more conventional mathematical transformations and just variance analysis of the parameters of each company to find the parameters that are the best predictors of the success of each company. Now let's switch a little bit to stock market analytics, which is actually currently the most developed tool in the whole big data analytics dashboards, because the data is very liquid and we can validate results very fast by just looking at the performance of the companies. Here we try to combine conventional econometric models with advanced artificial intelligence and deep learning tools to meet to face the problems that we encounter when we have unconventionally volatile stock longevity stock market data. And here we forecast stock prices through Brownian motion and enhancing it with various fat tail models. This is a tool which can be considered as some combination of various stock market analytics methods we have applied here. It's Portfolio Constructor. It's also available by this link, where every investor can actually select a portfolio of from the predefined list of longevity corporations and to track their performance, to optimize this portfolio either using one of the available algorithms or just selecting the weights for each company by herself. On the other hand, for people who just want to do it quickly and who trust algorithms, we have several different portfolio optimization algorithms here, including our proprietary gross optimal portfolio models, but also we have more conventional like Sharpe ratio, minimum variance models. And what is also very important here is that we really need to have different parameters to evaluate the performance and to evaluate the risk of the portfolio, because as I said, the returns of publicly traded companies are not normally distributed, and the volatility is really not a good measure of the performance of the risk of many biotech stocks. That's why we need at least to look at such parameters as skewness and kurtosis of the companies to see what happens, to see the impact of the extreme events on the stock price dynamics for longevity corporations. And extreme events in the case of longevity stock market are not such rare events. I mean that often it happens that after successful or vice versa unsuccessful clinical trials, there are very large changes in stock prices after some period where stock prices were very stable. And if we take it into account, volatility cannot be a proper risk measure because the stock is not volatile, but then suddenly it drops or suddenly grows. We need to look at high moments of the distribution. Also, we have developed here various other risk metrics such as value at risk, trainer measure, expected shortfall. And by adjusting the weights of our portfolio, of this portfolio in our portfolio constructor, you can play with all these parameters to define a set of stocks that meets your specific needs in terms of risk and return. And we aim to further backtest and validate these tools to select such metrics that reflect in the most relevant way what happens specifically in biotech market and in the longevity industry. Also, there is a separate public longevity companies big data analytics dashboard dedicated specifically to the analytics of publicly traded companies in the sector. And basically, all these tools can be applied for investors, can be applied by investors and by companies. In terms of what can be useful for companies, it's mostly SWOT analysis of the competitors, also benchmarking and ranking of the competitors. It may be a matching with prospective investors, finding investors that have companies with a similar portfolio. It may be also recommendations on hiring specialists using our graph databases with connections in the whole longevity industry. And regarding services for investors, of course, first and foremost, it's portfolio optimization that enables to select a set of companies that meets individual expectations on the risk and return. It's automated early stage due diligence of longevity startups. It's a preliminary selection of investment targets, and it's also analysis of the strategies of competitors, because we do not only have the data on companies, but the data on the portfolios of investors and the parameters of the companies they invest in. Okay, with that, I'm finishing my presentation. Thank you very much for listening to, and looking forward to further talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Igor. Quite comprehensive indeed. And a reminder for anybody who has specific questions for Igor or any one of our speakers today, please feel free to pop those into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll do our best to address them during the roundtable a bit later. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome our next speaker, Mark Leakey, Senior Advisor and Independent Board Director for Global Markets Advisor Group, LLC, who will be speaking on SPAC considerations for sponsors and private companies. Mark, a pleasure to have you with us. I'm excited to hear your talk. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Franco. And I want to thank the Deep Knowledge Group for giving us the opportunity to share information about SPACs with your global audience. A little bit about us, the Global Markets Advisory Group. We're a boutique advisory team. We focus on capital markets, and we specialize in regulations, technology, and trading and listings. Now, let's focus on the main deal. And for private companies and for investors that are looking to invest in companies that want to go public, and for private companies that want to go public, considering it, it's a pretty good time. And I speak of that in terms of the opportunities, options that the companies now have. You can stay local, you can go global. And if you were to look globally, there's all these different exchanges around the world, a lot of excellent ones, and you have your choice. For companies that want to look at the U.S. market, there's some reason why what they would find there, and that's part of the reason why many companies are attracted to go there. One is that it's the deepest pool of capital in the world. Another one, there are many sophisticated investors who are pretty adept at evaluating companies, just like we were talking about the new longevity industry, a growing market, a growing industry. And also for companies that are considering to do business in the United States or to have partners in the United States, grow the business in the U.S. to get closer to their to potential partners and to customers. Now, if you want to go to the U.S., there are essentially three ways how to do that, three options. One, of course, is the traditional IPO process. And that's underwriter-driven process. We all know about that. We're a private company. We'll sell new shares to the market. Another way, which is very, very new, is called a direct listing. And that direct listing is a way to go public without a underwriter. Essentially, and Spotify did this. You can offer existing shares to the market, and you become a public company. And then there's another way that's like an offshoot of this direct listing, where a company can sell existing shares and it also can sell new shares to the market, well, without an underwriter. So I'm not aware of any company that has done that yet. The second part, the one with the selling new shares, but that is a possible avenue for companies. Now for the main show, which is SPACs. I'm here to talk about a little bit about SPACs. Now that is essentially, that's a two-step process where initially you have a company that's called a special purpose acquisition company, which is a blank check company, not an operating company. They're built up, they're created for the sole purpose of getting money, putting it in their a chest, and using that money and to effect a merger with a private company. They do a search, global search. Recently, it's been a global. Before, it was paying attention very much in the U.S., but there are so many SPACs out there now. They have gone global, and to merge with that company and to form a business combination, and that business combination becomes a public company. Now, that has become a very, very, very popular way to go public in the United States, and now you have an opportunity to merge with a SPAC in different markets, including in Europe and in Asia. Now there are about 450 SPACs that are currently searching for merger candidates. It's a lot of companies. And there are around 280 companies have filed, SPACs have filed for IPOs in the United States. We're talking about pretty soon there could be like over 700 SPACs that are in the market looking for merger candidates, looking for potential partners to take public. This year so far, I think of almost $150 billion worth of capital has been raised through IPO SPACs in the United States. Massive. Why is it so popular? What I would like to do is just give a little, have some comparisons. The incumbent traditional IPO process versus the new up-and-coming SPAC and just talk a little bit about that. I'll pick a few factors. One of them will be valuation, another will be speed, another one would be the use of proformas, and the fourth one will be the synergies. So in a traditional IPO, how's the company valued? First of all, I think that we could say that the outcome is sort of uncertain. It's determined by the underwriters who receive input from institutional investors who typically are their like investor clients, and also by market conditions. It all comes together on pricing day, and if it doesn't come together, then it doesn't. There's no IPO, there's no pricing, there's no valuation, and it's not a done deal. On the other hand, you look at the SPACs, the valuation is more certain, although when we say more certain, nothing is ever 100% guaranteed. With a SPAC, the outcome is determined through negotiations between the SPAC and the operating company, the private company that wants to go public. And they are negotiating what would be the terms of their agreement to go public. What would be the valuation? And so before the company actually goes public, it's already written in an agreement what the valuation would be. So there's a higher degree of certainty for a SPAC. Second thing is speed. With a traditional IPO, it could take anywhere from like 6 to 12 months to 18 months to effect that. Now, if you're already public and you want to do a dual listing in the US, then it could be more closer to like 6 months because the company is already prepared to go public. But for many other companies and private companies, some of them have been in existence for a good amount of time. They've been operating for a while. Their systems are in place. They have the public company mindset, and it'll be closer to 6 months, but oftentimes it's longer. It could take about maybe 12 months or as long as 18 months, 2 years. On the other hand, if you compare that with a SPAC, for the company that wants to go public and merge with a SPAC, that process could be from anywhere like 3-4 months to 6-7 months. And so it's a much shorter time frame. I think that's one of the reasons why many companies want to go public by merging with a SPAC. But I just mentioned that that's a double-edged sword. So on one hand, it's easy, it's faster to go public for that private company that wants to go public to a merger with a SPAC. But what that means is that there's less time to prepare to go public. So companies that are considering to go public with a merger with a SPAC, what they should be doing is before they start engaging with a SPAC to talk about what the deal would look like, what the final valuation would look like, what they should be doing is to start preparing months in advance to become a public company. That's for one of the things is to have the financials audited and to have corporate governance in place and have internal controls in place, or at least to have have thought about it. And that is that's something where it's a double-edged sword. It's faster to go public, but there's less time to prepare. Another one, the third point is proformas. Traditional IPOs, the company that's going public, by and large, they cannot use projections, and they disclose historical financials, historical information about the company. On the other hand, a company that is planning to go public through with a merger with a SPAC, what they can do is to have pro forma information. They're allowed to show the public what the synergies are between themselves and the SPAC that wants to merge with them, the SPAC with all of that money, and that wants to merge with them. What is the synergies, and how would the company's operations, the financials, how would it look down the road if they do follow through with this business combination? So What this means is that it's a good vehicle for companies that are developing, that are growing, that are high growth companies, high potential, and have potential to continue to grow, that might not be yet profitable, but maybe on the verge of that being profitable, or they have a good, credible plan as a roadmap to be profitable. And so for those types of companies, I think that, that's why, another reason why many companies have chosen to go public via SPAC. And the fourth thing I'd like to talk about is synergies. When you have a traditional IPO, you have the bankers, the lawyers, they're excellent at what they do, top of the game, and they will take you to be a public company. But after that, unless you hire them for post public services, you can't really tap into them. There's no partnership there. But with a SPAC, what's one of the most key points I think about merging with a SPAC is that the SPAC team and how the members of the team can help you as a private company going public, prepare to go public, and to help you with your strategy and to become a successful public company, to grow your company. And the SPAC team will probably, they might have people who are not just, who are investors who give you access to capital down the road. And they also have great expertise in a particular area, hopefully in the area that you're in, and can help you build your business. So that's very, very important too. So I think that the synergies are very, very important. What they say is that for a private company that merges with a SPAC, the best deal might not be from the SPAC that has the biggest financial offer, but it could be, what does that SPAC team give to you to take you to the next level in terms of your business strategy, things like that? Can you work with them? What expertise do they bring to the table? Very, very important. Now I would like to just talk a little bit about some practical tips that could be helpful for SPACs and for private companies seeking to go public via a SPAC. One is for the SPAC is to you have the management team. You have to recruit a very credible leadership team. It's extremely important. That is what you're marketing. If a traditional company, operating company doing an IPO, they have a history of their track record, their financials, what the sales were, what have they done in the past. But with a SPAC, you don't have that, because the SPAC is just a company that raises capital for the purpose of acquiring another company. And so what investors are looking at is the management of the team. Is this management of the SPAC, are they credible? Will they be? Do they have the expertise? Do they have the network to attract and to do a deal with a company that wants to go public? So the credibility of the SPAC team is number one. That's extremely important. A second point is to focus on specific sectors. And if you focus on specific sectors, and that would be indicated in the prospectus, what sector you're focusing on, like in healthcare or technology or a combination thereof, you have more of an opportunity to attract long-term investors. And I think that's what many companies want down the road. A third point I think is to go big in terms of the IPO size. And the reason for that, well, let me just step back. This year, the IPO median size, I believe it's around for a SPAC in the United States, is around 270, $280 million. Last year was around $330 million. And what size enables the company to do, a SPAC to do when they go out and search? It enables them to expand the pool of possible candidates they can bid for, the small companies, the mid-sized companies, and the larger companies. If there's a bidding war, they can outbid their competitors. Also, a big IPO will tend to have a bigger media splash for those reasons. Another one is to go big in terms of the target company. And there are excellent companies that are smaller companies. And I'm not saying that you don't go after those companies, but I think that if some of these larger companies tend to get more attention from analysts, from media, and from the investors. So I think that that is another point. A fifth point is when you announce a deal, if you're a SPAC, that you have sign a definitive agreement with a merger candidate. When you sign that deal, you also want to try to have in hand additional financing, such as from PIPE, such a public investment in public equity, in private private investment in public equity. And what that does when you announce the deal to the world is that gives the public and the investing public some comfort that a professional investing group has given a stamp of approval to your deal. So I think that that gives them confidence in what you're doing. And it also shows those outside investors and the public that this deal has a greater certainty of being executed, because there's a lot of money in there. And that would be able to not just help fund growth in the future, but also to get the deal done. Because what typically happens when there is a shareholder vote is that some of the shareholders might vote, might request to redeem the shares that they hold, and that would leave less money in the original pot. And by having this PIPE investment coming in, that reinforces the amount of money that you have to get the deal done. And then number 6, I think it's very, very important, is to have full and accurate disclosures, high quality due diligence. That's of paramount importance. I think that many of us have heard, who've been looking at the SPAC market very closely, about the attention that the SPAC frenzy has caused among investors and new sponsors coming in, but also caught the attention of regulators and litigators too. So I think it's very, very important that all I's are dotted, all T's are crossed when you conduct your due diligence. And is very important, and make sure that everything, all material information is disclosed, nothing is omitted. Very, very important. I already talked a little bit about the public company readiness. I think it's important for a SPAC, a merger candidate, a private company that wants to merge with a SPAC to be ready to go public. Now that takes a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort, and I think that shortcuts could be less expensive in the short run, but it could be more expensive in the long run, because things can happen. And so it's very, very important. And also, it's also important just to be able to attract SPACs, because if you are a great company, there's great potential, but the SPAC finds out that you don't have financial that are audited. that takes time. The SPAC is operating under a limited time period to get the deal done. It's typically like 1 year, 18 months, 2 years, and they want to ideally to engage with companies that are already ready to go public, or preparing to go public, or have given a lot of consideration to the preparation to go public. And talking again about the projections, the pro formas that the business combination will have when they go out just before they're public. It's very, very important to make sure that these pro formas, these projections, are grounded in reality. They have to be defensible. You don't want to have a situation where you have very, very, very lofty projections in order to attract investors. You go public right out of the box, you miss those projections. That is not a very positive way. It will probably not be received too well by the investors, and so it's better to be conservative in your projections. Another one is number 9 is international deals. As I mentioned, that many of the deals before, they were just domestic deals in the United States, but now you have SPACs coming from all parts of the world. You have companies that are operating companies that are wanting to list via merger with SPACs, and those companies are coming from all over the world. And when that happens, there are those deals can raise potential issues about corporate structure and also tax issues as well. You have international and domestic shareholders too. So that's something to think about. And then lastly is for companies that are in the process, you have to consider, remember that once you go public, you'll have to meet the stock exchange requirements as a publicly listed company. And that includes having a minimum number of shareholders. And you just have, when you go through the process, when maybe some of these shareholders are redeeming, those are public shareholders, and you're left with not as many public shareholders, you might fall outside of the stock exchange requirements, and that would be that has surprised a number of companies, and so it's something to think about as well. So that's it in a nutshell. And just we're talking about the SPACs, some of the differences between SPACs and traditional IPOs, why SPACs are so popular right now, and some tips for companies to think about both on the SPAC side and from the private operating company side when they merge, to think about to have a successful experience. So I thank you very much for the opportunity. And if you have questions, I'll be very happy to speak with you during the panel session. Thank you.
The thanks and the pleasure is all ours, Mark. Very wide-ranging and insightful talk. I particularly enjoyed the practical bent of it and the nature of the practical recommendations for companies, looking or considering SPACs versus IPOs. So very, very insightful. For anybody who has specific questions for Mark, please feel free to pop those into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will table those to address them later for the panel discussion. I would now like to welcome to the floor our next speaker, our very own Kate Batts, Director of Strategy and Business Development for Deep Knowledge Ventures, who will be giving an overview of market trends and investment-related activities in the AI in pharma landscape and ecosystem. Kate, always a pleasure. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Franco. It's always a pleasure to be here. So let me start with sharing my screen here. Let me know if you can see everything. Okay, so my name is Kate Butts. I'm a managing partner of Deep Knowledge Group. I also supervise business development at Deep Knowledge Ventures. As many of you know, and Andre mentioned earlier, Deep Knowledge Group has a number of subsidiaries, including Deep Knowledge Analytics, which from its inception had a specific interest in AI and pharma. We have a number of analytical departments within our structures, such as Deep Pharma Intelligence, e-governance analytics, COVID-19 analytics, space tech analytics, and a number of others. And from our founding, we've actually were able to establish a number of collaborations with different players in the industry. As I mentioned, AI, and specifically AI and drug discovery, has been our focus. And so over the past few years, we've published a number of open access analytical reports on artificial intelligence. We've covered AI in Eastern Europe, UK, as well as Asia. And we have a few new reports coming up, and I will give the announcement at the end of my presentation as to where you can find them. So going to AI in pharma sector. On average, it takes about 10 years and about $2.6 billion to develop a drug without utilizing AI. This is about a 145% increase compared to 2003. The solution to these problems lays by utilizing three approaches. Number one is evolution of business models towards more collaboration and early pipeline diversification. Further, usage of AI is very important, and it officiates a universal shift towards data-centric drug discovery. And then finally, it's also important to discover new therapeutic modalities, such as biologics and therapies. If we look at the evolution of AI in pharma, we actually are not looking at a very long time period, because we have, if we look at, 2013, 2015 time period, when we first started to have, pilot projects and small investments being made, actually Deep Knowledge Ventures under the umbrella of Deep Knowledge Group was amongst those investors. We are the flagship investors in silico medicine. And then further in 2016, 2017, the area, this space actually grew some criticism because there were some failures with pilot projects. However, this was followed by market cap growth in 2018, because actually successes started manifesting themselves, and a few more VC funds and subsidiary funds started focusing solely on the AI for drug discovery subsector. Then in 2019, we really are seeing first practical validations of previously conducted research. And we're seeing the transition from quantity to quality. In 2020-21, we actually are seeing an intense competition in this sphere. And pretty much all big players in pharma are now either creating their own departments, which would utilize AI, or they opt out for having, collaborations with other, AI-focused companies. Our projection is that in 2022, 2023, we're going to see platform-based drug design. Okay. In terms of dynamics of investments, if we start from the inception of 2014 time period, we were just under $1 billion, and then in 2021, as of October, I believe the amount of investment is close to $13 billion, and this is a 14-fold increase. If we are looking at top 10 AI and pharma companies, this diagram actually, depicts that, and we welcome everyone to actually check out our analytical reports, which further highlight the details. If we're looking at the countries where most of the investment comes from, so United States is definitely the leader in terms of the investments. We're looking at $15 billion, with $3.7 billion attracted in 2021. Interestingly enough, we also have a new leader stepping in, which is Switzerland, because in 2021 alone, they've attracted $5 billion, which is quite significant. In terms of where the leading investments are based, here we have United States, followed by China, EU, UK, and Singapore. If we look at AI and pharma publicly traded companies, here we actually, at least partially attributed to the COVID-19 pandemic, we're seeing the increase in market capitalization of publicly traded companies to 4.47 billion. And the expected compound annual growth is projected to be around 40% in the next 3 years. Another interesting and noteworthy trend is collaborations between traditional pharmaceutical companies and AI companies, because AI-focused companies, bring to the table the software and tools which the traditional pharma companies do not have. And on the other hand, large established pharma companies, mainly the public ones, have solid understanding of science, R&D, extensive experience in the industry and regulatory field. If we're looking at collaborations involving AI for drug discovery, starting from 2018 to date, we're seeing a rapid increase, and the rising interest of leading pharma and contract research organization towards AI-driven biotech startups is a major driver for this space to becoming so attractive to investors. And this has been conditioned on the fact that there was a wave of successful proof of concept studies. There was a number of commercial successes. And also, we are seeing the trend of democratizing AI when machine and deep learning algorithms become available to non-AI experts. There was also a decent increase in overall understanding of AI mechanisms due to the increased efforts in the education and professional developments with the focus on AI-driven tools and approaches. So this chart actually represents top pharma companies by the number on pharma AI deals in 2021. Again, this is in open access, so for details, you are welcome to review the analytics on our website, dk.global. And this chart shows top tech companies by the number of pharma AI deals in 2021, with Existentia leading the way. Well, last and not least, because I understand we're running short on time, I wanted to announce that we're having 2 upcoming analytical reports coming soon at the dk.global-life-scientist-basel. One of them will be focused on Basel area life scientist ecosystem. And another one will be covering artificial intelligence industry in Switzerland in Q4 2021. And also I would like to mention that tomorrow, one of our other analytical subsidiaries, Femtech Analytics, will be covering the fundraising aspect in Femtech, and this will involve AI as well. So I welcome everyone to attend. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to a robust Q&A session.
Likewise, Kate, many thanks. Yes, and a reminder, anybody who has specific questions for our speakers, please pop those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to address them during the panel. I would now like to welcome to the floor our next speaker, Kevin Chen, CEO of EDOC Acquisition Corp, who will be sharing some insights on how SPACs can help biotech companies grow. Kevin, a distinct pleasure to have you with us. I look forward to your talk. The floor is yours.
Sure. Thanks, Franco, for the invitation. It's really glad to be here on this call. And so I did prepare some slides, but I'll just I guess go through them, and later on feel free to interrupt me anytime or ask questions. A couple of words about myself. So I've been on Wall Street for 20 plus years. Right now we run a couple of SPACs. One is dedicated to healthcare. And in addition, I've been teaching at New York University as an adjunct professor about fintech and global risk. So we are pretty involved with the SPAC space and on Wall Street, I would say. So first, I like to kind of, we have a great speaker earlier who really give a very good introduction and about the why SPAC, etc. I like to kind of step back a little bit and to, I guess, give my personal view of why SPAC suddenly becomes so popular. And I guess my understanding is SPAC really becomes so popular now because of the zero interest rate by the Fed or by the global central banks. When you have a global zero interest rate everywhere, it's a very painful time for investors, in particular for the traditional fixed income investors. Zero is zero, right? Or tiny return would not really give you much. And for whether it's insurance companies, institutions, pensions, etc., they are in a very tough spot. They have those obligations skyrocketing, and they don't get much return from what they can traditionally invest in different bonds. And that's why, it's totally not a coincidence that when March last year, when unfortunately, when COVID hit, and the Fed cut the interest rate to zero, and right after that, SPAC took off. So this is a way of, I guess, for investors to look for a better return, and that's the market's reaction from a macro point of view. Why immediately you see so much demand, but also so much supply from SPAC side. And in a summary, right? How does a SPAC deal work? And later on, I will cover also why SPAC would be such a good, I guess, potential approach for capital raising for the biotech companies. First, it's for SPAC, you need to have a sponsor. The sponsor could be traditional financial institutions. And right now, we see a lot of SPACs are already sponsored by major investment banks, asset management companies, private equities, etc. A SPAC, a sponsor could also be, let's say, industry players. For example, could be some, hospitals, or could be about, some physicians, etc. Could be, I've seen some SPACs, sponsored by, let's say, a traditional consumer brand operator, retail, real estate. Really could be anyone, but you need a sponsor to put together a team and put down some capital, somewhere from 5 to 10 million, probably, or more, as sponsor capital. And after that, you file the application with S1 with SEC. Go find the investment bank to go to IPO, raise money, and put the money into a trust. The focus here, emphasize, is the money is from the IPO is going to be put into a trust. You cannot touch the money as a sponsor. It's in the trust. The money is there, but you cannot use it for the operating of the company. After the money, the raise could be anywhere from, I've seen cases, smaller ones like 15 million, larger ones, several $1 billion, put them into a trust. And then after that, the sponsor, the team would go to look for target companies. They can look at across different sectors, different size, and they need to conduct thorough due diligence. The due diligence would include financial due diligence, legal due diligence, and commercial due diligence. Our earlier speaker, Mark, said it very well. The audit, which is part of the financial due diligence, is very, very important. To have the PCAOB qualified audit report is not an easy thing. It will take 3 to 6 months at least. It will take a lot of resource, and takes a whole team to essentially make sure the target company after the SPAC merger would be public market ready. And you'll know that the capital markets in the US is it's highly regulated. You need to make sure the internal control, disclosure, and all those would fit for public market trading. You need the stock exchange to approve your listing, either NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. Traditionally, a lot of SPACs are actually mainly listed on the NASDAQ, and also because of biotech and tech focus, I would say, on NASDAQ. But it's not just NASDAQ. In fact, the New York Stock Exchange has been very competitive in landing new SPAC deals over the past year. So they're catching up very quickly. So there's pros and cons for both the exchanges, for the SPAC companies and for the targeted companies to evaluate and decide which one to go with, whether NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange. And then after the target company and the sponsor, the SPAC company agreed on the deal, they can sign the agreement, file with the regulators, and also possibly you can raise a PIPE finance. I've seen a lot more SPACs recently announced deals with the PIPE finance. It's not a requirement, but it does provide more confidence to the market participants if we can raise PIPE finance. After the deal announcement, it will be reviewed by the regulators. And after that, there will be a solicitation of proxy vote. Shareholders of the SPAC company can vote yes or no to the deal. If the vote is yes, the deal will go through. If the vote is no, the deal will not go through. At the same time, the shareholders will decide whether they want to redeem the capital from the trust fund, or they want to leave the capital in the trust fund. It's a big debate right now because some of the deals have seen a lot of redemption, and the redemption percentage has fluctuated quite a bit. Earlier this year, the redemption was very low. Later on, it became very high, and I've heard the figure that its redemption rate actually declined again, which is a good thing. So after the redemption is cleared, the new entity would start public trading. It's almost like the second IPO in the sense that now you got a real company being traded, and it will just be like any other public traded company. You will need to do the quarterly filing. You need to do the disclosures, 8Ks, and all those. So let's look at the return for a SPAC investor. Why investors want to invest in SPACs, right? First, I would say the most important part is when investors participate in a SPAC IPO, they actually have the downside protection, because down the road, if they don't like the deal, they can redeem. So I would say it's as close to zero risk as you can. And that's why when you invest in a SPAC IPO or buy those stocks, a lot of those investors are traditional fixed income investors. They are apart from some hedge funds who are going after the yield, there are insurance companies, pension funds, mutual funds, etc., are high net worth investors, because they know that the money they invest in are going to be in the trust, and they have the right to redeem, which is a very, very good feature, and it's as close to a bond as you can. So that's why it's very popular for the investors. But that's really the downside protection. What about the upside? For the investors, you got what's so-called synthetic yield. Why? Because typically for SPAC shares, public IPO unit, You got warrants and you got rights. And those warrants or rights are attached to the IPO units that essentially give you some upside. And you could actually request them to be separately traded. Sometimes they are traded together with the unit. Sometimes they're separated. Either way, it provides the yield enhancement to the investors. And that's a synthetic yield that if you, put it into, let's say, the traditional fixed income yield, framework, you're looking at something probably, high single digits to low double digits return yield for the investment, which is very attractive, in particular in a zero yield environment. And that's why, my view is that as long as there's a zero interest rate in this world, SPACs are going to be still very, very popular. People talk about a bubble of SPAC. Yes, there are some bubble. However, it's not going to go away as long as there's zero interest rate and the investors are looking for yield. And let's look at some of the statistics, right, in the market. So last year, and before that, in fact, on average, there are probably 10 to 20 or 30 SPAC deals, IPOs. 2016, there were 13 SPACs, 2017, 30, 2018, 46, and 2019, 59 SPACs. Last year, there were 248 SPACs. As I said, due to COVID, due to zero interest rate, SPAC really exploded. And this year, so far, we already have about 600 SPACs IPO. So that's a number of SPACs. Value, usually in the past, it was around, total capital raise was about 10 to $20 billion raise, total IPO dollar amount. Last year, 83 billion. This year, close to 200 billion already. So what you are seeing is last year's total SPAC raise was more than the total SPAC raise of past 20 years in 2020. This year, it's already more than doubled of the SPAC raise of last year. And if you look at business combination, it has accelerated too. Essentially, people are getting deal done faster than before. Latest, newest SPAC IPOs, they typically do a deal in about a year. In the past, SPACs usually have a business combination done within 2 years. So essentially, it's getting bigger, more frequently, and faster. And I like to also, add some more reason of the benefit of SPAC. In the US, actually, I wrote a book chapter recently about, why SPAC is actually saving the capitalism. Why SPAC is so good for the American economy, because in America, it used to be around 9,000 public traded companies in the year about 20 years ago. The total number of companies shrink and went down to as low as 4,500 by the end of 2019. Last year was the first year for the last 20 years to see the number increasing, to see actually there are a net increase of public traded company, and to see more innovative companies being public early, or actually increasing the choice for investors is a very good thing. And on the supply side, roughly there are about 10,000 PE-backed companies are ready to go public. Traditional IPO would not be able to price all of them, would not be able to provide the finance. Just like Mark said earlier, the traditional IPO process is very lengthy and very costly. And for those promising, many of them are promising companies to go public. One good approach is to choose a SPAC to go public. And also there's a valuation differential too, that essentially SPAC IPO is a traditional IPO in reverse. traditional IPO, you set, you talk to investors asking for different valuation and build a book. And by the time it goes public, you realize the total market cap would be. For SPAC IPO, it's the other way around. You set up the valuation first, and you decide, whether you will raise some PIPE finance, etc., whether people redeem, and after that, so you will get a public traded company, but the valuation is decided before you go through the business combination. And also for SPAC companies, you got the benefit of public market readiness before you go to IPO, because the SPAC companies already is a public traded company. You got the ready-made board, management, etc. That will be a good a step up for a private hold company. When it goes to public, you got already a ready-made governance structure for the company to be public ready. And I would say, and also there's the important part of strategic versus financial investors. In the SPAC space, in fact, you will notice that there are a lot of SPACs being sponsored or created by industry veterans. I've seen, healthcare industry, financial industry, manufacturing, consumers, the former CEOs of major companies, they go to sponsor SPAC and provide guidance to the company's growth, which is very different from a traditional IPO process, right? When a smaller company go IPO, their investors typically are mutual funds, hedge funds, financial incentivized team or investors, instead of the more the industry insiders who could really provide strategic value to them. And lastly, in this panel, I like to also emphasize that healthcare is a very special sector. Of course, last year, COVID really, created, I would say, a lot more, incentivized for every country to invest more in healthcare. And for a lot of, I would say, relatively younger and upcoming companies in healthcare space, what you see is they tend to have very strong growth potential, but they tend to have limited revenue, and they tend to be cash flow negative. It will be very hard for traditional IPO to price them. It will be very hard to come up with a proper valuation and a diverse shareholder base. So SPAC in healthcare would be a good match, because SPAC, you tend to have many of those sponsor investors are already healthcare sector, veterans, right? They can connect with the healthcare, the younger, newer company, and then connect them with experts immediately, instead of searching, public market supporters. And also, one last thing I'd like to add is also until late 2019, in fact, the global capital markets has seen a kind of drought of the new, healthcare companies going public, whether it's, medical equipment, biotech, innovation companies, or digital health. I believe the reason was the public market has become very short-sighted, and they were really looking for, very mature companies. On average, I've seen the IPO companies on average have 8 years history, operating history, versus 20 years ago, on average, companies go IPO when they have 4 years history. And the public market are looking for mature companies with decent cash flow and with everything all set. While this is not the case for most of the healthcare companies, they are not the type, a good match for a typical IPO. However, the health, the healthcare sector, the growth, the potential is huge, right? A lot of those firms easily could go to multi-billion-dollar company when they can roll out their product or service well. So that's the forward-looking part is really what makes a SPAC to be so a good match for the biotech firms. And that's why I personally see more deals coming. And I guess my presentation ends here, but I'll look forward to our panel discussion with all the other distinguished speakers.
As do we, Kevin, as do we. So thank you so much for a very insightful and again, practically applicable talk. It was really great. A reminder, once again, anybody who has specific questions for our speakers, feel free to pop those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to address them during the panel shortly forthcoming. I'd now like to welcome to the floor our next speaker, Daniel Haters II, a healthcare investor and operator at Sway Ventures, who will be sharing his vision of why the future of pharma is AI. Daniel, a pleasure to have you with us. The floor is yours. Oh, apologies, Daniel, you're still muted.
There's always one of us, right? Every single presentation, and you can see my screen.
We can. Everything else is crystal clear and perfect. So all good now.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. Appreciate the introduction. As mentioned, I'm an operating partner for digital health at Sway Ventures, a venture capital firm, a managing director for digital health at NextCube, which is an early stage investor and accelerator, and just assumed the role of CEO at Model Medicines, which is very prescient for today's discussion. So I'm going to be talking about the future of pharma, and specifically the future of pharma being AI when it comes to drug discovery. So, as we all know, this is one heck of a time to be alive. To put it in some perspective, the human take of COVID-19 is that this is the worst global healthcare crisis in at least 40 years since the onset of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, but probably more appropriately 100 years since the Spanish flu. The social take of COVID-19 is that, at least here in the US, we sit in the midst of the greatest US civil rights movement in at least 50 years as well. The financial take of COVID-19 is that we've endured the worst economic crisis in at least the last 10 years since the Great Recession, but probably more appropriately the last 90 years, meaning the Great Depression. But of course, with great crises come great opportunity. And the digital health take of COVID-19 is that we sit squarely in the middle of the greatest population health opportunity in at least 160 years since we really started to understand the power of clean drinking water for public health, or probably maybe even more appropriately 220 years since the invention of the smallpox vaccine. And this revolution that we're a part of today is based on something different though. So for the first time since the advent of clean water and vaccines, we have the opportunity to reduce costs and improve outcomes in healthcare all at the same time because of artificial intelligence and data. Now, some people may say, well, what's the big deal? You're talking about your 2 bullet points, reducing costs and improving outcomes. Where the truth of the matter is that whenever there's a new method to discover drugs or bring them to market, or any new healthcare technology that's been brought online, when those technologies are brought online, they say that they're going to reduce costs and improve outcomes. But the truth of the matter is, other than things like surgical masks and clean water and vaccines, the numbers just don't prove that to be true. New medical technologies, whether they be pharmaceuticals, whether they be other types of medical technologies, when they improve outcomes, they also increase costs. Or when they reduce costs, they don't actually improve outcomes. And that's what the data has told us time and time again, no matter what any single company may say about any single product. So we all understand that the current approach to drug discovery is broken beyond, maybe beyond salvaging, at least from the traditional approaches, right? It takes over 10 years on average to bring a new drug from discovery to the pharmacy. And it costs, on average, $2.5 billion to run that same process, including hard costs and opportunity costs. And why is that the case? Well, it's the case because only 3 drugs that start in discovery make it all the way to the pharmacy, right? We're talking less than 0.015% of drugs make that journey. And so when that is your hit rate, when that is the efficiency of your R&D, that's why it takes 10 years and $2.5 billion. But what does this mean specifically? In reality, what this means is that there are 350 drugs failing in late-stage clinical trials every year, typically. And when you take a number like 350 drugs, and you're talking about development costs that are on the orders of billions, you can see that there's potentially $500 billion in terms of hard cash losses and opportunity cash losses in failures every single year in the drug development space. And this shows it even more why it's a broken system, right? Here's a headline from a few years ago that shows that the real IRR on pharma R&D is going negative, right? It's on its way to negative. In this case, this particular study indicated that last year, based on trends, that we may have hit that 0% IRR number. The failure rates are high and IRR is low because traditional drug discovery and development is neither repeatable nor able to utilize the totality of chemistry and biological knowledge, right? We have an industry that drives or controls a huge portion of GDP and healthcare spend and quite a large portion of our lives, and determines, in many cases, how long our lives are or how well we spend the time that we have. And the truth of the matter is, it's simply not repeatable. What other industry could exist this long without creating repeatable, scalable processes to create their products? And also what's important to double down on here is that the way that pharmaceutical development is done today oftentimes is not hypothesis-driven science as you may like to think that it is. Many times it's driven by things like high throughput screening or simply serendipity that leads to the drugs that may be life-saving or life-changing drugs. But this is no way to run an industry, right? This is no way to grow a company. However, repeatability and utilization of large data sets is what artificial intelligence and data science was created for. AI and data science is now at the beginning of ushering in the next revolution in drug discovery. And as you can see in this slide here, there's been a number of epochs in the development of the pharmaceutical industry. So you have names that either, in their current name or existed way back in the 1800s that many of us are familiar with. And then as those companies started to grow, we started to see the industrialization of the pharmaceutical industry, right? The same principles that were being used in factories or scaling up manufacturing started to be used, and you saw a new generation of pharmaceutical companies develop. Then in the 1970s and 80s, you started the Biopharma Revolution, which was definitely a revolution. But in retrospect, what we really did, we didn't figure out a way to reduce costs. What in fact we did is figure out a new way to discover drugs. And did we discover drugs? Of course. some of the most globally healthcare changing drugs, these large molecule drugs that we couldn't have even dreamed about in the 40s or 50s, have now come to change people's lives the world over. However, just because we discovered a new way to discover drugs didn't mean that we discovered a new way to make that process repeatable. And we certainly didn't take costs out of the system, as all of us know by the headlines, mostly negative, about the costs, especially of large molecule therapeutic interventions. Moving forward to there, we got into robotics-assisted drug discovery. And so this is really where high throughput screening started coming. We realized that if we couldn't create hypothesis-driven research to repeatedly discover drugs, potentially through brute force methods, right? Tiny wells, as many of them as we could pack on the plates, robotic systems that could run 24/7 and allow us to do a massive amount of experimentation to supplement our inability to do hypothesis-driven research and to effectively capitalize on the compendium of chemistry and biology data that we have spent the last decades and centuries building. And that was a revolution in its own right. And now we sit squarely in the middle of the genomics-based revolution, right? And of course, all of us, or I'm sure many of us on the call, are recipients of RNA-based, mRNA-based therapeutics to combat COVID-19, right? And so we're all becoming beneficiaries of this. But once again, we've discovered a new way to deliver to create therapeutics, but we haven't necessarily created a new repeatable low-cost way to do it. So where do we go from here? This is where AI-driven drug discovery comes in. To understand AI drug discovery, you need to start with the data. And there's primarily 6 types of data that AI drug discovery companies start with. Text-based approaches, which is literally oftentimes where you're pulling information, say from the literature. These are often big data, NLP-based approaches to identifying inferences and sentiment analysis within documents to make connections from big data point of view that humans haven't been able to make. Cellular-based data, ADMET-based data, genetics-based data, protein-based data, and chemistry-based data are all now being used as well. And these are different versions of either chemistry or protein or biology-based information that now, because we can either have publicly available data sets with enough data points to make them useful, or we're able to create proprietary data sets, we're able now to leverage this data, transform it, clean it, parse it, and feed it into algorithms that are then able to take that data and discover the next generation of drugs. Why is this important? And I keep on coming back to this point. When these algorithms ingest this data, they're ingesting the compendium of all of the experiments from all of the bench scientists through all of history that have done all this work, that have published all this data in peer-reviewed literature. And it's creating databases and it's creating algorithms that are able to learn from decades and decades and decades of experimentation in a way that humans simply are not able to. And what happens when you're able to learn from all the experiments of history and through experiments from different points of view, i.e. a chemistry point of view, a protein, a genetics, cellular, ADMET, whatever it might be? What you're able to do is you're able to create a repeatable process, or at least you're able to know what not to do. And oftentimes when you're doing discovery work, learning what not to do and being able to cross off 99.9% of the white space is just as important as knowing where to look and what to do, right? And that's what these data sources allow us to do. And that's what AI and data science allow us to do when we utilize these decades and centuries of chemistry and biology-based information that we now have. So how does repeatability and data utilization change the business model of pharma, though. Well, you can see it in these J curves here. So the curve that you see on the furthest to the right here, this is a typical successful approval process. And you get a sense of how much cost here, right, and how much time here goes into creating a product versus how much time is available to create how much revenue after a drug is approved. And what you'll see is a long amount of time and a lot of costs are sunk into a short period of time for pharma companies to generate revenue. And hence, this is why drug prices oftentimes are considered to be out of control. But with AI and with data science, we can drive these curves to the left. And when we drive curves to the left, that fundamentally changes the business of pharmaceutical development. If you drive it all the way to the left, as you can see in this darker line here, and you can imagine a world that's just a handful of years and maybe tens of millions of dollars to bring a drug to market versus 10 or more years and billions of dollars to bring a drug to market, you fundamentally change the diseases that you can go after, the targets that you can interrogate, and the prices, frankly, that you need to charge to recoup your investment. And this changes the industry. And this is also important, right? A lot of people get tied up with the idea of AI, and they focus on the AI. But typically, in all businesses, and especially in the pharma business, the problem that you're trying to solve has nothing directly to do with AI. It's a business problem. And this is where the product market fit for AI and data science in the pharmaceutical industry is so good, right? These 5 factors are what keep pharma CEOs up all night, right? Return on R&D investment, the efficiency of their discovery, the robustness of their pipeline, the diversification across targets, indication families, and the speed to market. AI and data science can and has started to drive efficiencies and top decile type results across all of these factors for the industry. So does it actually work though? So selfishly, this is a chart created from some work that Model Medicines has been doing recently. Model Medicines created a platform that the company calls the ChemPrint platform and has been working in the COVID-19 infectious disease drug discovery process since the virus hit the shores of the US. And what you see here in this chart is the hit rate for in vitro validated drug discoveries, comparing the literature of Dittmar et al. And Yang et al. And Chen et al. Versus, say, a tier one of the best institutes in the world at executing high throughput screening drug discovery, that being Scripps Research, versus what Model Medicines has been able to achieve in combination with Scripps Research. What you see here on the left is this quote from Arnav Chaudhary, VP of Medicinal Chemistry at Caliber. And what we have found is that this partnership that we have with Scripps has demonstrated that integrating artificial intelligence and machine learning models into traditional HTS drug discovery can significantly improve the efficacy of drug discoveries. And these results show an order of magnitude change in the efficiency of drug discovery when AI is added into the mix. But it isn't something, of course, that's just happening at Model Medicines. As we all know, there's a number of companies. And so it's also starting to happen in the clinic. This is a recent headline for last year with an AI drug discovery, an AI designed drug entering human clinical trials for the first time. So it's not just something that's happening in one place. This is happening across the industry. The tidal wave is coming. But now, does the market agree? And so here we look, this is from Rock Health, and I know there's some results that you guys were shown previously. But in this assessment, investment by American VC funds into research and development-based digital health companies i.e. the Valos and Citros and Silicos, model medicines, Recursions of the world. It was the #1 funded value proposition in the first half of this year. And that was because of COVID, and it was because of a realization that the pharmaceutical industry needs to change. Also, though, we've seen it on the public markets with either IPOs or the announcement of IPOs or SPACs, companies like Recursion, Valo, and Exscientia, and very successful fundraising from companies like Helix and Atomwise as well. But it's not just that these companies are starting to show results. It's not just that they're gaining funding, but they're also doing drug discovery deals, indicated by this chart here. Schrodinger with BMS, Recursion with Bayer, in silico with Pfizer, and in Citro with Gilead and BMS as well. And these deals show that in the research labs of large strategic pharma companies, that this is gaining traction. So it's not just a VC story. It's not just a public market story. It's not just a clinical or a scientific story. It's a business story as well now. I hope you guys have seen from what I've showed you today that the future of pharma truly is AI. And I look forward to answering some questions after the next speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Daniel. I quite appreciated the high-level takeaways from your presentation and sort of a global view in terms of global population health, long-term history of healthcare, et cetera, in addition to its many more particular specific insights, et cetera. So thank you. My
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Likewise, the pleasure is all ours. I'd now like to welcome to the floor our next and final speaker prior to the panel discussion and roundtable, quickly forthcoming. Swati Chavardeni, co-founder and CEO of Propel X, who will be sharing insights on reimagining the 2 I's, innovation and investment in life sciences. Swati, it's a distinct pleasure to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Franco. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and let me know if you guys can see it. Can you see this?
We can, yes.
Perfect, perfect. I'm going to put it in presentation mode. Just give me a second. Okay. Can you see this now?
It appears to be slightly cut off, actually.
Oh, well, I will just then go back to the original mode in that case. Give me a second.
Maybe just try one more time in case it was a glitch, and if not, actually that's perfect. Yes, we can see it crystal clear now. So
excellent. Well, it's nice to be here. Thank you, everyone, for your attention today. It's an exciting time to be in life sciences, and I was listening to the previous speech and would love to connect, of course. But yes, I do believe AI is the future, and actually, I'm going to be highlighting some similar aspects and what's likely to go into life sciences, both in investing and innovation. So let's get started. So I'm really talking about 2 things, what's changing in investing and what's changing in innovation. I'll try to stay focused. So on investing, I do want to give a little bit of background on myself. So I am the CEO of Propel X. Propel X is an online investment platform. So obviously, I believe that investment in startups, in venture capital is going to go much broader than institutions alone. I'll talk more about that. We also run a venture capital fund. It's called Newton Fund. So we are both kind of a VC, but also we run an investment platform. And so we see multiple sides of things. And life sciences is certainly our biggest sector. So let me get started. The brief disclaimer. So reimagining investment. the investment landscape is changing. Let's begin with what some of the largest companies like the Pfizers and the Takedas and Novartis of the world, they're basically outsourcing R&D to startups. And the large companies really have become more of marketing and sales and marketing companies. So what that means is startups have proliferated, and you can see that in how many exits are happening in biotech. So per Biopharma Dive last year, there were 71 biotech IPOs in 2020, each greater than 50 million. So that's really substantial public market activity for life sciences. And the reason we are having so many exits is because there were so many startups to begin with. So there's a lot of startups, and historically venture capital funds alone have been investing in startups, especially life sciences tends to be a really different kind of risk, and you do need some bit of knowledge about the industry in order to be understanding that risk. But now there are proliferated platforms. There's a lot of platforms out there. It happens so that PropelX is a specialized platform. We focus on what we call deep technologies. So we focus on deep tech startups, and we find that startup investments have opened up to individual investors, which means that so people of a certain net worth or certain wealth level now have the ability to invest in startups, including life science startups, in their early phases, mid phases, late phases, pre-IPO, and during the IPO. So it is really expanding, and that really is my focus. The point I want to make is that the investment landscape is changing, that individuals are now able to support these companies and invest in these companies early on. So a little bit more about that. And this pertains to what we do at PropelX, because we do enable investments in life sciences. It's our biggest sector by far. And here, we've been covered by major media, and it's an online investment platform where individuals and funds and family offices can buy and sell stakes in startups and venture funds. Life sciences by far is our biggest sector. So we do about 60% of our deal flow, 60% of our dollar flow is in life sciences. We do cover other sectors as well, but life sciences is our biggest sector. And what PropelX enables investors to do is to discover these startups online, to evaluate them. You can participate in investor Q&A, you can have live webinars, etc., and you can invest. It's all an online investment, very streamlined flow. And the best thing is that all offerings are made by a FINRA regulated member, which means a FINRA member. So it's a regulated platform. It is global, web-based, it is affordable. You accept as little as $5,000. And it does solve a lot of information asymmetry. We do curate our own startups, and we conduct detailed due diligence on each. So again, the reason I'm making this point is now, today, life science startups are supported by individual investors worldwide. So it's a little bit of a change in mindset, and investing is changing. So what have we done so far? 300 plus startups have been showcased, 100 plus deals have been closed on the PropelX platform. More than 28 million has been invested. We do investments across stages, everything from seed to pre-IPO. Certainly in life sciences, we've done devices, diagnostics, therapeutics across the spectrum. So with that, I mean, that was the main point of how we can reimagine investing. But I do want to focus on what we think is going to change on the innovation side of things. So I am going to focus on personalized medicine. So if we were to reimagine innovation in life sciences, it's going to, the one thing that I'm going to focus on, the one takeaway is personalized medicine. And this goes back a little bit to what was said in the previous speech about the cost of computing and so on and so forth. So I do want to take a little step aside and take a little bit of a look at how the information technology industry evolved, right? So if you look at this chart, shows from the Brookings Institution, it shows the cost of what an iPad 2 would have cost in 2010 dollars over time. So an iPad 2 in the 1940s would have cost the equivalent of about $1 trillion. $1 trillion. It costs now about $200 maybe. So the cost of computing has really come down, right? And now we have a lot of computational power on our fingertips. And at the same time, the power or how many computations are being done per second has really gone up. So if you look again, this is again from the Brookings Institution from the 1980s going all the way till 2010. And these are the number of computations per second in billions. So this has substantially grown. I mean, this is just a logarithmic scale. So it has grown tremendously. We are seeing two things. Cost is coming down, cost of computation is coming down, and the power or how much we are able to compute per second is going up. So we can do more and more at lower and lower cost. What does that mean? At least in information technologies, all of these applications proliferated. You know, Amazon, which analyzes customer data all the time, millions and millions of data points every minute. Facebook, which produces so much of information and analyzes that and serves you up the right kind of information, etc. Twitter, same thing. So why did this happen? It happened because there was a decrease in cost as well as an increase in power. And we see this happening in other industries, including life sciences. Very specifically, I want to look at the cost of gene sequencing. So the cost of gene sequencing has come down. Again, this graph is probably almost more stark than the cost of the iPad that I showed, in that the cost of gene sequencing has come down substantially, enormously. It costs a few $100s now. It used to cost $100 million plus in 2001. Just 2 decades ago. So this is very stark, and this does result in certain implications. We now have more data, more individual data than we ever had before, and the cost of analyzing that data has come down very substantially. So what does that mean? It does imply that since we have so much data on every individual, personalized medicine is going to grow. And we do see that in some of the evidence. If you look at the novel drugs approved by FDA, from 2014 to 2017, more than 20% were personalized medicine drugs. And 42% of all drugs under development as of 2017 were categorized as personalized medicine. So this is the future. And what do we think? What kind of opportunities does this yield? Well, there's going to be opportunities in everything from selecting therapies to delivering personalized therapies. And it is not just limited to human beings. There are applications of life sciences, of biology, in agriculture, in food, in animals. So all of these areas are going to benefit from the rise in the data that we have and the power to analyze that data. And so I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I'm going to share a couple of examples now, companies that have fundraised on the PropelX platform, but they are operating in these areas. So one of them is Immusoft. This is a cell therapy, a combined cell and gene therapy approach. And Immusoft has developed something called immune system programming. I'll go into that in a little bit. But essentially, this is a way to reprogram a patient's own cells to fight disease, own B cells to fight disease by producing therapeutic proteins. Immusoft has received funding from major VCs, including the Peter Thiel's Founders Fund, as well as PropelX investors. And they just signed an agreement with Takeda for a collaboration with potential value up to $900 million if all milestones are met. So just taking a quick look, as I said, this is about personalized medicine. So the goal, remember, is to deliver protein therapeutics by reprogramming the patient's own cells. So the way this works, there's this 6-step process. You collect the patient's blood, and you select and purify the B cells, which really are the precursors to the plasma cells. And then they have a proprietary gene delivery mechanism whereby you infuse engineered DNA into these cells, and then you expand and differentiate the cells and infuse them back into the patient. And once engrafted back, these programmed cells then produce the therapeutic proteins around the clock, for extended periods of time. So again, this is a combined gene and cell therapy approach, but this is really focused on personalized medicine. It does leverage all of these advancements in data production and analytics, really. So this was one example of what we see growing more and more in the future, a lot of personalization and efficiency. Another example I do want to give, which is not in human life sciences, but as I mentioned, applications range far beyond just humans alone. The applications are in animals, in food and drugs, in agriculture, and so on. So another company that we helped finance was a company called Aromics. Aromics is digitizing the sense of scent or smell and taste, right? Well, and how do they do it? There have been many different approaches to digitize the sense of smell, but nothing has been really successful. So what the approach that Aromics is taking, they're trying to replicate the human receptors. So in our nose and in our palate, there are about 400 receptors for sense and smell, and every receptor, depending on, let's say you're at a Starbucks or a coffee place, and depending on the aroma of the coffee, specific receptors become activated to a different extent. And so what Aromics is doing is replicating these receptors on a 400 well plate, and you can then, when the specific smell wafts past, you can determine which of the receptors was, there are certain changes in the receptors which can then be read using standard PCR technology, and you can determine which receptors were activated to what extent. And this way you can actually develop an aroma graph. So what Aromics has developed is something called an essence chip, which has all these receptors on a plate, and these can then be activated in the presence of a different smell or flavor and so on. So again, this is a foundational technology because this tells us how we can replicate certain expensive perfumes, fragrances, using cheaper materials, or certain flavors like salt, while using non-harmful ingredients. So these are some applications which take advantage of this advancement in computing power, essentially. And that was the key point. What we see in the innovation coming forward is advancements that leverage the growth in computing power and the reduction in computing costs. So with that, I will wrap up. My 15 minutes are up. So thank you. If you're interested in companies like this, join us at propelx.com, and happy to answer questions after this. Looking forward to the discussion. I'll stop the share now.
Thank you so much, Swati. I would now like to welcome all of our speakers to turn on their cameras and come together for a roundtable and a panel discussion. An excellent lineup of talks, needless to say, today. It was a really fantastic session and a privilege to moderate it. We have one question in the Q&A box before I launch into some more general questions that I've prepared myself. But a reminder for any of our viewers who do have questions for our speakers, now is the time to address them. So please feel free to pop them into the Q&A box. From Jose Cordero, a friend of ours who we've had on other webinars, asks how much faster we can advance with AI for drug development. So I assume that he's speaking in general terms, in terms of real quantitative numbers. How much acceleration are we really looking at here? Andre or Helen, perhaps you'd like to briefly answer that before we dive into some more investment focused questions.
Well, I think with respects to digital, I think we're seeing more, I want to say, innovation within what's called, and I think it's become more popular, this whole idea of platform technology, where you're now starting to see more digital therapeutics really enhancing the research and development process, where you have companies like Moderna, who was able to kind of pivot based on their platform and based on responding at a specific need. And you're going to start seeing, with regards to innovations, like digital therapy and other products and treatments, where companies can just kind of pivot on the whim in terms of if there is a pandemic, whether it's a virus or whether, it's something to do with cancer or something to do with, CNS. You're going to have companies with platforms who are able to pivot and move their research and development in that certain space. And we're working with a company right now where they are actually starting to build such platform called iPlatform, which will service the metabolic space, which will service the nephrology space, which will service the CNS space. And so I think you're going to start seeing more of that occurring, where research and development is going to become more efficient and more able to kind of pivot to certain disease states.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andre. Andre and Helen, any brief remarks to follow up?
I would also add that, first of all, I'm really I agree with the previous thing, and that's indeed the rise of platform-based businesses is what drives the new wave of technology innovation in pharma. And on top of that, the very important thing is being able to model biology, and modeling biology is a very complex and multifaceted thing, because on the one hand, you need companies who can conduct high throughput experimentation and collect data automatically. And we have seen some companies who are quite useful in this case. For example, Arcturus, one of from the top of my mind. And then on the other hand, we need companies who can model that data, being able to build real ontologies for the diseases, to understand, the similarities between healthy cells and diseased cells, for example, finds new targets, etc. And in my opinion, this whole thing will move quite dramatically once certain degree of modeling will be achieved by the industry, and we are rapidly going in that direction. Once the biology kind of cracked to a significant extent, the way other technologies will be progressing in this field will exponentially go from that point. So in my opinion, might happen within several years from now. But some companies, cite a reason, for example, another company from the top of my mind, which models biology on the cell level. And yes, and so these companies, this platform-based companies, those will win who have the data, who have the ability to model biology, who can from there derive new, treatments, preclinical candidates with high success rates, etc. That's just
very well said, Andre. Yeah, it's definitely going to be AI and IT technologies that drives disruption in this field. And I know that we were talking on, I believe, yesterday's panel, certain competitive advantages that AI for drug discovery startups and scale-ups might have over some of the bigger players, specifically a platform-first mindset that is the foundation of their psychology and in their bones as a company, etc. So very well said, and thank you. Helen, did you have something to add briefly to that?
Yeah, so real quick, we should also take count on big tech companies who also enter pharma field, like NVIDIA with their Clara Discovery platform. And keep an eye on CROs merging with the platforms that already mentioned by previous speakers. Because big tech, they have enormous amounts of investments in this field right now, which is kind of a big deal, and their advantages over big pharma companies in that kind of question.
Very well said, and seems sensible enough to me. Moving away from a strictly technology standpoint and getting more into investment trend specifics, et cetera, I would say certainly biotech is a notoriously difficult space for investments, especially as far as, reliable valuation, due diligence, et cetera, comes into play. We're only seeing the complexity and the degree of multidimensionality increase when we think of things like AI for drug discovery and longevity in particular, which was a particular focus of a number of our earlier talks. So I'm wondering if our speakers today have any particular thoughts on what unique challenges there are for investment in biotech and healthcare and pharma and in longevity compared to other sectors, and in particular with regards to going public, whether that's via special purpose acquisition company or via traditional IPO. What are the major challenges in this space compared to other sectors?
Well, let's start with the very fundamental reason why biotech is kind of unique is the unpredictability of research itself. So like with the company developing, coffee machines, let's say, you can pretty much project how the business is going to operate more or less. I mean, you can be kind of wrong on some projections, but at least you know that the coffee machine is going to make coffee. And that's 100%. In research, that doesn't work like that most of the time. And if you good example is Alzheimer therapeutic area, where the whole it's doubtful that the theory that is now underlying this therapeutic area is actually correct or correct to a very high extent. Maybe some other factors play a role, and so we see a lot of failures in clinical trial where, of course, there was the initial financial bet on that, and then the bet just goes to nothing when it appears that the drug just doesn't work for whatever reason. And of course, everybody was trying hard, but if the biology was misunderstood at some point, at some early point, there is no way it will actually go well at the end. So that's the major problem with the biotech investment in general. And so that's why, by the way, we see a lot of, everybody understands why we see a lot of, fluctuation in early stage public companies, or because, the clinical trial data goes out and it appears that it's not very good. That's it. End of story. So, and the AI and the technology, this kind of industrialization of biology is one very major shift, positive shift in the direction of being able to understand biology more, and therefore make it more like a coffee machine kind of business where you know pretty much that the product at least is going to work. That's my...
Right. Though I would say to some extent it might be a dual optima problem, because while these AI technologies do bring in a lot of objectification, et cetera, and validation, we're also seeing healthcare and medicines themselves becoming more complex. There's a big growing trend, especially long-term, towards more personalized medicines, more precise, medicines precisely tailored to specific cohorts and population groups, et cetera, and bringing longevity into play, which seeks to act upon and modulate these deep-rooted targets, which are actually fundamental causes of myriads of diseases. It's pretty complex. So we could see an increase, I think, at least in complexification. So thankfully, technological disruptors like AI are coming in to help smooth things along, perhaps. To spin this, my original question. Right. Sorry, Daniel. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add to that around the, you completely agree with everything that, biopharma tends to have a barbell structure, and that AI, as I was talking about, hopefully is bringing repeatability into the process. But really appreciate what you were saying as well about the complexity on the personalized health side. I know that the people that I spend time with, and I myself believe this, that the future is not simply using AI to discover drugs or using, a portfolio company of ours, Applied VR, got clearance just literally yesterday to start marketing a VR therapeutic, and which is an amazing step unto itself. But I think where we're really going, and this is where the complexity comes in, is that personalized health doesn't always just mean a pill specifically for you. What it can also mean is a portfolio of parallel therapies that you're receiving simultaneously, which may include a pill, which may include a digital therapeutic, which may include an app that provides you community, which may also include something for your mental health, right? Because as it's been well shown, especially among cancer patients, those who have substantial supporting networks, who do not suffer from any type of food or housing or monetary instability, that have stable relationships, those folks do better. And so I think, personalized healthcare is when you receive a cancer diagnosis, potentially, you're getting a pill, a digital therapeutic, you're getting community, and you're getting mental health support in one form or another, all in there. And I think that's the true future, where right now we're really likely making investments where we're investing in a company that's only doing one of those things. But I think the future is maybe indication based, and it's an ecosystem solution to a healthcare problem that includes all of those pieces. And that is not easy to do. We're doing all of those things right now, but we're not doing them in parallel in a single product currently. But if we get there, I think the future of healthcare becomes very exciting and very patient-centric at that point.
Yeah. May I add something to that?
Absolutely.
There's one more thing I wanted to add to your original question, Franco, of why is it hard for people to invest in biotech? I think Andre gave a very good explanation. The science is uncertain, but there's also this regulatory uncertainty. It's not just that the science is uncertain, but how you design that clinical experiment, that clinical trial, and how many patients, that design itself has a lot of just mathematical uncertainty. And that makes it, very hard to, you may have a drug that actually works, but, the trials may not show that, and so on. So it's just a combination of these different factors. So people who are investing in this either have to have a deep understanding, or they need to have a community who's actually sharing these insights.
To bounce off what Swati said, I think patience is going to be the virtue, because when we talk about research and development and the whole process, I think what the whole COVID deal has kind of taught all of us is that we can't move down the future where we're going to get, drugs through the pipeline in a year. And I think that's what's happened, is that at least the colleagues that I talk to who are in the investment business and in biotech, is this sense of, well, we'll be able to get the return instantly if we see a designated unicorn. And so, Swati makes a great point in that we have to get back to this thinking where, no, we have to be even more methodical in our approach in terms of getting a product from discovery to the point where, it's going commercial. So it's drawing back these unrealized expectations based on what we learned from COVID, and getting back to the roots of the methodical approach of getting a product, through R&D successful on the other end.
And adding on to what people have been saying, I think that, we're talking about complexity. And if you are planning to go public and get investor support, you have to make sure that what is complex is distilled down to its bare essence, and it's transformed into a narrative that is easily digestible to the general public and to the regular investors. There are sophisticated investors who, a lot of those people may have been educated in science, but a lot of people have not been. So you get a deep dive into complexity, and then you lose people. And it's there's so much great things happening, and it's very important to get the support of the general public and other investors. Another point is that many of these companies are not profitable, and maybe they won't be profitable for a bit. They have to have a plan, a roadmap to show that there is profitability. It has to be based in reality. And I think when you get companies, when you are in that situation, what you want to do is to get people to focus on your potential. And one way to do that is to talk about projections, pro formas, and things that could happen in the future. And I think that once that happens, you have the regulators looking at that very, very, very closely. So we're talking about some challenges. I think that that's a challenge, because I think that the regulators are focusing on that right now. What are companies saying to attract investors? And it has to be defensible. So that's my 2 cents there.
Yeah,
Well,
if I may add something, Franco. Yeah, so you guys talked about how to make investors to be more receptive to the biotech deals, biotech companies, right? There's another important part, to keep in mind, which is I've noticed that, I guess, because of the most of biotech companies are pre-revenue, they're running cash flow negative. When they raise money, they use a lot of creative, instruments, right? You usually throw in, warrants, rights. You have a lot of things. But look at what happened with Tesla. If you open the Wall Street Journal yesterday, right? Tesla and JP Morgan, they are having a fight now because of some of those warrants from Tesla was priced maybe 5 years ago at a different price, and warrants as usual, right? Tesla had a lot of split, issuing new stocks, converts, and all those strike price had to be reset a couple of times, and ultimately it caused a lot of disagreement, right, among different investors. So for biotech firms, when you have super complex shareholder structure, all those warrants and all those, how do you keep, the investor to be, not only treated fairly, but also keep the investors informed, let them know what is going on? It's very difficult. And, it's not like, I think Andre mentioned about coffee makers, right? Coffee makers don't issue so many complex warrants to different investors and reset the price every 2 to 3 years. And that's why quite often I think makes a lot of people afraid of investing in biotech, because they don't even know the valuation. They invest and they don't know what they get. And in fact, even if they know what they get, after 2 years it might be changed. And for the shareholder price reset, it's quite often it's very complex. And so which comes to the question of when you're a public traded company, eventually how to disclose all those, right? And what I've noticed is a lot of biotech companies are relatively small. They don't have a deep bench of corporate governance structure with a lot of experienced independent directors and all those, and maybe they're very good at research. But how do you make sure the companies properly all the major events disclosed to the investors, and the finance, the cap table is run properly? That's a huge challenge, and that's why I think we need there are more work to be done too.
Yes, that's exactly also what the SEC in the U.S. is focusing on, exactly what Kevin has just talked about.
Yeah, well, before we depart from the topic of complexity and some of the issues that presents for investors, for going public, for valuation, for due diligence, etc., I was wondering specifically, SPACs versus IPOs. Given SPACs generally higher speediness, they're quicker to do, etc. To what extent does that impact the process of valuation? et cetera, and specifically technological or therapeutic due diligence. I'm thinking back to some of the comments from Igor Kenduhov, who's not with us, but spoke earlier on some longevity companies specifically who went public on the basis of preclinical data and who saw their market cap dynamics go not as they expected when they had clinical trial failures, et cetera. Both Kevin and Mark remarked on the fact that SPACs can often be quicker to do, et cetera. Does that perhaps present some element of risk in doing due diligence, et cetera, and proper, reliable valuation, given the higher complexity of biotech, healthcare, et cetera, versus other sectors?
I think of it this way. I'm not necessarily a big SPAC fan because I look at it between the difference of fundamentals versus rainbows, in a sense, with regards to SPACs. But I think SPACs, depending on, some people would say the presence of the founder. If the founder is a rock star, or if the founder is somebody that can generate, investment dollars, or a founder who can generate excitement about the SPAC. I've always been along the lines of I'm more or less fundamentals. I like to learn a little bit more about the company's leadership, what the vision is, versus this is a good idea, so we're going to take it to market. So I'm a little bit jaundiced when it comes to the SPAC approach. I understand it does have some validity within the marketplace because most companies don't want to go through the rigor that you would have to go through as far as going IPO, but I would say, if you are going to go down the road of SPAC, whatever due diligence that can be a part of that process, to me, in my opinion, is always a good thing.
Yeah, I think that if you could look at if you look at the SPAC, and the SPAC has a timeline, it usually has like a 18-month to 2 years to get a deal done. There's situations where the SPAC enters into a agreement with a prospective merger candidate, and they conduct due diligence. If that process takes place like in the beginning or in the middle of the SPAC's life, there's ample time, and there is some caution where in situations where the SPACs enters into this agreement with a potential candidate and is getting closer to the end of its life. In that case, there has to be very much attention, extreme focus on getting that due diligence done within that compressed amount of time. Some people have said that as you get closer, that the due diligence, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, that sort of has a lesser priority. So you have to make sure, because that people are going to be looking at that. You just have to make sure that within the confines of the time, the importance of doing due diligence for the investors and the regulators, that you have to get that done and do it very effectively.
Okay, yeah. So in other words, there is ample time, but it should be done earlier in the process than later, etc. Thank you, Mark. I'd love to hear everyone's opinions on how COVID shakes things up with regards to healthcare, pharma, and biotech. We've heard a number of speakers remark about the fact that perhaps contrary to initial expectations, COVID actually facilitated a bit of a boom in the space, whether you're looking at VC or SPACs, IPOs, or even the performance of biotech stock indices, et cetera. And among other things, COVID really elevated the to a prominent place in public perception the importance of health. Health is new wealth, right? We're all thinking about our health these days. So, but we've also seen at least a little bit, I think, of a downturn in 2021 compared to 2020 and that phenomenal rise. Do you see this prolonging? Do you think that the impact of COVID, specifically and broadly on biotech, healthcare, et cetera, continuing or tapering off? Where are we going?
I think it.
Go
Go ahead, Daniel.
I'm happy to start. What I think is there's likely the same type of patterns that we've seen after other dislocations, that I think in general general populations will go back to the way it was, or people will react to what's in front of them. I think in here in the U.S. and around the world, most people they're reacting to what's in front of them, right? Getting through the day and whatnot. And so as this subsides, thoughts will move on. However, I think that's very different than the awakening in capital markets, and I think that will last much longer here. And I think that there is among decision makers, there's also this better deep-rooted understanding of how healthcare is fundamental to functioning markets, right? At a macro scale, how it's fundamental to even national security, right? And the strength of nations at that level. And so I think that's not going to be forgotten. I think you'll see increases in publicly available funds. I think you'll see increases in privately available funds, even as we see things recede from the front pages of newspapers. But I also think the threshold, the expectations are going to go way up. I think, Andre, you mentioned, the creation of vaccines in just such a short period of time. I think people are going to think that that's the norm, rather than understanding that as a group scientific achievement by numerous scientists at numerous companies. This is something that we'll look back, many, many years from now and say how amazing that it was that we were able to marshal the talent and the resources to do things this quickly. But I think because of that, the mark has gone up. So people are also not going to be say, oh, I've heard that before. Moderna already did that, and they did it this quickly. You guys aren't as fast as that, or you're not as cheap as that, or whatever it might be. So anyway, in short, basically, I think capital will continue to flow in, both from governments for the reasons I mentioned, for private markets, because now they understand the magnitude of what can happen, the multiplying effects of dollars and enterprise value when you do get it right in biopharma and in biotech. But I do expect to see a pullback in the headlines, and CEOs won't be the celebrities that they are in 5 years that they are today that work in the space.
Sure. Very well said. Andre, did you want to add something to that?
No, Daniel's spot on. I think the expectation to kind of come back down, so to speak, with regards to, getting products through the process. COVID, it's had its lasting effect, whether you say it's negative or positive. But I think the positive piece on COVID is that it's brought everybody back to the sense of, pharmaceuticals and the life sciences are important to our everyday lives. It's what helps us keep going. The industry are not a bunch of devils at this point in time. So there's a reason why research and development is so important, in that it keeps moving forward with the new technology, with the new AI, so that we can bring, products to market that not only put a Band-Aid on a situation, but actually rectify and cure. So I think that's it's COVID has done many things, but if I look at it from a glass half full, it's gotten everybody's attention to say how important, research and development and the industry is with regards to keeping us healthy.
There's one more point I want to add is in terms of consumer education. So for example, these at-home COVID test kits, right? So people got them home. They actually read the instructions. They figured out how to take the swabs to put them in. And there is a reader right there, and you can even get the information on your phone. So this was an accelerated learning experience for many consumers who now realize, oh, by the way, I can conduct many, many tests at home, and I can get all of the results online on my phone, and I can actually store them for convenience. And now that expectation starts to proliferate into other therapies or diagnostics and such, where you are like, yeah, I want constant continuous glucose monitoring. By the way, I also want my blood pressure monitoring, which is not there yet, and so on, right? So people have become more attuned to this idea of better understanding the possibilities in healthcare.
I was going to say such a great point, because if you look at a specific industry in our market that's kind of gone through the roof based on what's happened in this pandemic, and that's telemedicine. Right. So again, to Swati's point, you had to stay at home, so you couldn't go see your physician, physically. So the whole telemedicine, piece of our business and that technology has kind of skyrocketed because it's had to. So that's such a great point.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Kate, did you have anything particular to add? I remember you had a great op-ed in Market Watch the other year, I think last year, with Dmitry Kaminsky, our general partner, on how COVID's impacting both biotech investments and longevity in particular. General agreement with the panel, or anything else to add?
I'm in general agreement, but also I will add that, a deep knowledge group has been talking about longevity, which we define as health span, or living healthier for longer. And we've been on it since 2013. So for us, it was a very welcome development to see that, of course, we have other, players in the longevity community, but specifically 2020 brought everyone's focus to, health truly being a new wealth. And we were, glad to publish our piece in Market Watch on that subject. I also would say that, yes, 2020 was definitely a remarkable year for biotech. We're seeing a slightly different trend, in 2021. My understanding is that, we will continue having a focus on health, but perhaps not like in terms of investments in 2020, but definitely the focus has shifted, and this is very good indeed.
Okay, well said. So I'd like to shift gears. We've talked a lot about how investment in financial infrastructure and different types of vehicles, et cetera, impact the industry, et cetera, and the intersection there. I'd love to hear our panel's thoughts on any specific sectors of interest. In particular, are there any sectors that you see as being undervalued at the moment, which you expect to see have a huge rise moving forward? Telemedicine was a great example. I wouldn't say it's underrepresented per se, but it saw a huge boost from these external factors that were driven by COVID. So underrepresented sectors in biotech, healthcare, digital health, pharma, or longevity. What's not really on the spotlight right now that might be taking prominence in the coming years? Open question for all.
Well, let me take this one, and basically, I know that I will not be most probably agreed upon on this by investors, because they primarily look at the business side of things. Of course, they should do, but in my opinion, antibiotics area is really kind of in pain right now. At least has been for the last couple of, I think for the last decade or maybe two. And we have seen some signs of, of increasing success rates. Some companies emerged, new antibiotics, but the point is the COVID might be a very, it might not be the greatest risk that we are facing in the coming decade, because if antibiotics, and they are running out very quickly right now, if they go basically useless, but because bacteria they kind of mutate, and we have seen a lot of new cases where we basically have antibiotic resistant bacteria in hospitals everywhere, and usual bacteria can kill a human if an antibiotic treatment is not administered. And imagine if there are no antibiotics left, let's say by 2030, then there's going to be a lot of chaos. And so, in my opinion, some platform-based companies like, for example, iCheap, I remember that was the company who developed the tool to quickly develop antibiotic from soil on the high throughput kind of approach, iCheap or something like that. They developed teixobactin. So the point is, I believe that now the public is not aware of this problem to the very to the extent they should. Only specialists, probably some, WHO. I mean, some experts, they of course know the problem, but the general public is not aware of this problem for the most part. And I believe those kind of companies who spot this and who can really bring startups to the market, or maybe invest in some early stage, will be very timely in like 5 years from now, when this antibiotics thing actually goes to some critical level. In my opinion, we might have another Moderna, but in antibiotic space, let's say in 5 or 7 years from now, if the catalyst is if we catalyze the processes of investing in that area today. But of course, everybody knows why antibiotics is unattractive for investors from the investment standpoint. So I'm not a big expert in the antibiotic space. It's just something that I wanted to stress, that this area really needs a lot of activity, much more activity than it has right now.
I myself, I've never heard of that, and if that does come about, that would be a disaster for humanity. And also, there's a great opportunity for, as you mentioned, some companies stepping in. Are you aware of companies that are able to, or very close to stepping in and creating that platform that you talked about?
That's you mean the iCheap that I mentioned, or?
Yeah. I think that you were saying that.
Yeah, that's just one. That was the research back in 2015, I guess. That I don't remember the name of the company, but teixobactin is kind of the lead molecule that they developed, and they claimed at that point that the molecule would not develop resistance due to its properties. But again, what they developed, the iCheap, was that device which would allow quick discovery of new antibiotics as they are needed. Pretty much the way that, like, very simplistic comparison. I mean, it's very simplistic, but it's like mRNA technology where you can basically print vaccines very quickly, essentially. This is kind of like that approach where you can basically have soil, and most of the antibiotics were discovered from soil, as we all know, and then discover the new antibiotics much faster, and reiterate and pivot with some new bacteria types, etc. So just one company, I mean, there are many of antibiotics companies, but in general, this is very underrepresented area in terms of funding, because for the most part, big pharma abandoned this area because it's just not comparable to cancer therapeutics, because you can make much more, like, it's not about money, of course, but you can be much more safe in terms of business operations when you developed, cancer therapeutics compared to antibiotics. But anyway, that's just open question. That's something I'd like to raise here.
And I will add my 2 cents here as well, with a disclaimer that this is a area that is of specific interest to us. And if anything, we have a newly formed subsidiary, Femtech Analytics. So I would like to see more investment in Femtech, defined as products, services, software, diagnostics, which use technology to focus and improve women's health. There are positive developments, in that field. However, we think that this area actually is underrepresented in a general picture, and would like to see positive trajectory in that regard as well.
Yeah, if I had to say anything, what's going to be of interest to investors, certainly to us, is wearables. And there's wearables of all kinds. There's this rise in the idea of quantified self and tracking everything about me. And people are interested. And these are like things that sell in the millions of units. And then there is the data data subscription. So it's a very profitable businesses coming out of this. That is one area which I think we are quite interested in. The other thing I would say is, I personally feel everyone should have a little bit in their portfolio, or at least I do in my portfolio, of just biotech and therapeutics. Therapeutics, why? Because I think the likelihood of success may be low, or the chances of big outcome are low, but the outcome itself can be very big. So the weighted risk is, or the weighted outcome is, expected outcome is very high. So I like to personally, in my personal portfolio, have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 therapeutics, and then lots of these other different areas that are coming up. Wearables is important.
And in this case, would you lean towards things like indices, biotech stock indices that focus?
No, I wouldn't lean towards biotech stock indices. Sorry, I would go earlier and pick out the specific stocks, but that's just me. Not everyone.
It matches your background and area of expertise. So,
yeah. If I may add anything, I guess all the sectors you guys covered can go through SPAC IPO, all of them. I think wearables, very popular. Digital health, totally. I think last year there were several very major deals in digital health, remote monitoring, and diagnosis. And of course, biotech, right? We are seeing probably several deals per month for biotech companies go through a SPAC. So across board, all different sectors in healthcare, I think many of them are going through the SPAC IPO process. Oh, lastly, I forgot to mention also, I would say the healthcare insurance sector. I think currently, a lot of people are very upset with what they can get with, in the US for the healthcare insurance. I think it's very arcane, the model, everything is just, it's probably what's fit for 30, 20 years ago. Really not a good, a business model for the current world post COVID. So a lot of those innovations are being done, and I think many of them are going to end up in a SPAC. Like Clover Health, right? The one in California, very successful company, and I think more is coming down through SPAC.
Yeah, the health insurance is an interesting point. I mean, I'm aware of a lot of developments in terms of gamified health insurance and providers, offering discounted rates or other forms of remuneration for meeting certain health goals, etc. So yeah, well, it's been a lovely discussion. I think that's all we have time for today. But I'd like to thank all of our speakers for sticking around with us and for having what I hope was evident as a very dynamic and interesting and stimulating discussion that touched upon, not just technological trends and disruptors, but also investment trends, forecasts, etc. So yes, I would like to once again thank both our viewers and attendees, as well as our speakers for today. This is the 4th and final session of the 3-day conference A reminder for everybody viewing, all of the attendees for all sessions will receive a follow-up email in the coming days containing the full recordings, the full video recordings of all sessions, both full length as well as individual talks and each of the 4 panel discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, a quick reminder to our viewers, Deep Pharma Intelligence has announced during this 3-day conference the release of 2 open access special analytical case studies, both of which are available at deep-pharma.tech for your free viewing pleasure. And I'd like to encourage our viewers to check out Deep Pharma Intelligence's big data analytics platform, which again was designed to allow the content of its various analytical reports to be interacted with in a more interactive and dynamic manner. Users can construct their own personalized analytics to their liking. Once again, one and all, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again quite soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.